Hello and welcome to my channel, Emma Mental Health and Wellness Practitioner. Today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different, but something really significant and something really powerful that also affects our well-being and what we experience in our physical bodies. For those of you who don't know me, I practice as a functional medicine practitioner. I do nutritional therapy, and then I do quite a few other therapies, and I have approaches that are based on the mind, body, soul, everything that impacts on our energies as electrical beings. So this is a topic that many people shy away from because it feels perhaps unscientific. It seems as if it cannot be backed up by anything that has been studied adequately so that we could really trust the information that we get from it. But I was really drawn to this way of working many years ago, I would say, over 20 years ago, where I first became really fascinated with what else was going on in and around us. And I look back to the earliest times in, my youth as a child, teenager, young adult, where I was very aware, and I'm sure some of you will really relate to this as well. I was aware that there was something else, that it didn't necessarily take a physical knock from somebody for me to feel that something in my body was feeling different, maybe uneasy. For those of you who are also intuitive, you will know that you pick up on very subtle messages around you. So somebody doesn't necessarily have to say something. You might perhaps be able to tune into someone's mood or the dynamics in a situation without it being said. So today I just wanted to have a Sunday conversation about these other things, the energies around us and how it affects our bodies. I hope you find this interesting. Please subscribe, please comment, please let me know how this resonates for you. So a few years ago, and this was long after I'd already been exploring and learning and working with this, I was given this book called Why Woo Woo Works. And this is by David R. Hamilton. And this book, I suppose, I didn't need this information to convince me. It was just something interesting that I could perhaps refer some of my clients to, or somebody else to, if they felt skeptical about these alternative things. I don't see it as alternative at all. I see it as part of what we are living in this living matrix that, for us, it's not just this physicality of a skin and organs and tissues, that it's very much a vibrational field that can pick up on a lot. So Dr. David Hamilton is one of the leading experts in the field of the mind-body connection. And this is what is described on the back of the book as one of the clearest and most accurate expositions of the alternative mind-body practices that we come across. So there are healing modalities, there's spiritual practices, and very often, you might even notice that I'm wearing certain beads, crystals around my wrist today. People think of it as something strange or weird, but more and more I notice that people are becoming curious about something other than what we might find in the biology as such, and how our thoughts, our feelings, and what's happening around us and what's happening in the universe, what's happening in the stars and the planets and with the moon and with the sun can also impact on our physical bodies. So I want to just have a casual conversation about these invisible forces that have an extraordinary and profound impact on us as human beings. We're living in this field that's constantly changing and different things happening all the time. And also as technology evolves, the modern things around us, there's so much more that we have to integrate and that we have to navigate. So where does this come into play? How do we consider this? How do we ask the right questions? How do we start to ensure that our physical bodies are able to still heal and thrive and do well in spite of our exposure to so much? So for some people, maybe their first journey into something that is a little bit different to perhaps having an X-ray or having some blood tests done is to have a natal chart done in astrology. And when I talk about astrology, I'm really no expert, but I've always been very fascinated by it. And with astrology, I don't refer to your star sign. It's so much more than that. It's your natal chart that's based on your place of birth, your time of birth, and all the other influences of planets around at that time. So some people might find that there are certain months or certain years that they just can't quite explain why things just don't seem to get on track, or why sometimes things feel a whole lot easier. And this might apply to your finances, to your work life, to your relationships, or to your health, for example. And planets play a significant role in this, the placement of certain planets. But like I said, I'm no expert, but it is something to perhaps look at, especially if you're finding that you cannot explain why some things just don't seem to flow, or why perhaps you are doing so much to ensure that things are in place and going the right way, but it still seems to be struggling, or things just feel quite stuck. That is definitely a consideration. And for me, it has shed a lot of light on certain times in my life where things just were difficult or were challenging, even though I felt that I was really working hard to ensure that things were moving forward smoothly. So I like to work with an astrologer sometimes once a year to have a look at the placement of certain planets in my chart, just so that I have a better roadmap when I'm planning certain things, or when I'm trying to find a better way for things to plan out. And then, and especially recently, I've been so aware of it, and some of you might never have heard of this, but I started paying attention to what they refer to as geomagnetic storms, as solar flares, and like this activity that's part of certain eruptions from the sun. And especially in the last week, I've noticed quite a few of the people that I follow on social media mention the recent challenging energies. So when you hear people say the energies have been so intense, this is one of the things that they might be referring to, the energy. So that's everything around us, the things that we can't see, that we can't always pinpoint. And I don't try to predict anything. I don't look at the solar weather or the predictions for geomagnetic storms at the beginning of the week. But there are days where I feel perhaps super tired or super emotional, or just quite like things feel very amplified. And when I can't explain it with logic, so I know I've slept well, I've eaten well, I've exercised, I've done all my normal foundation health things. I've had enough water, I've taken my minerals, I've really ensured that my well-being is being supported with what I choose to eat and how I sleep. But there's something else going on that I can't put a finger on. I would then go to look at some of the sites to see, okay, is there something that I've maybe missed? Because for me, and it might be different for you, we're not all the same. We're not all affected in the same way. I feel especially exhausted when there's certain kind of geomagnetic activity that impacts on our atmosphere. So we are not separate from it. You know, there's a massive eruption from the sun that pushes certain frequencies into our atmosphere. Why would we not be affected by it? And people say, well, how do you know? And I think, well, if I look at the moon, for example, the phases of the moon have a significant influence on the tides of the ocean. So why would other things not also impact on how we feel and how energized or exhausted we feel at times, or why sometimes things just feel so amplified? So I look at information from time to time, and I know the last week has been especially challenging, and I've had some clients who've said my heart has done strange things. I feel like my heart is racing and I don't know why. I've been to the doctor, we can't find anything wrong. My advice usually is, you know, if we can rule out certain things, any physical concerns, if we can rule out something that is physiologically wrong in the body, I start with the basics, like, are you breathing properly? Are you putting your earth down on the ground and taking deep breaths from the center of the earth? And just really trying to anchor yourself, because very often we start to overthink. And this, to me, when we spend a lot of time in our minds, it's like having an electrical storm going on up here. So we've got to discharge all of that charge. We've got to exhale that into the earth. That's much bigger than us, where it can be held. So that's my approach. There might be many other very helpful approaches for this particular kind of struggle. If you're finding that there's a lot going on and you just feel your heart is racing, your mind is racing, I think breathing is a very good start, as well as hydration, filtered water with added minerals in the form of added salt, Celtic salt, Himalayan salt, or a liquid mineral and electrolyte solution that I like to recommend. So if you're breathing properly, and if you're then hydrating properly, then find perhaps something else that's quite supportive, just to get out of your thoughts and your thinking, something like a meditation or listening to music that feels soothing. So anything that will feel soothing might help to just get things back on an even keel. And then, not separate from, but part of this frequencies around us, and more as we continue with our exposure to cell phones, to wireless radiation, Wi-Fi. There's so many electronic devices around us all the time. And I'm not sure that we were really designed to just take this on and for our bodies to know exactly how to get rid of this additional exposure and charge all the time. So I don't have a photograph of that, but on my social media I do often share I have a small device, it's a little shield that I have stuck onto my cell phone. I have various other things in and around my home that I prefer to have in place because I do think we are struggling with this excessive exposure to electromagnetic frequencies around us, and we can't get away from it. We can't see it, but it's all around us, and I think it has a profound impact on our well-being. And something that I really urge all my clients to do is to switch the Wi-Fi off at night. When you go to bed, switch off your Wi-Fi and turn your phone onto airplane mode if possible, or else just make sure that you switch off your Wi-Fi and your Bluetooth connection so your phone is not constantly trying to search for connections right next to you while you're sleeping. If possible, perhaps you would want to put your phone in a different room away from your bedroom. But this exposure to EMF or electromagnetic frequencies that is all around us and part of modern life, I feel can sometimes be quite detrimental to us, especially when we're feeling scattered, when we're feeling exhausted, and when we just cannot explain why we're feeling out of sorts. So it is a consideration to see how we can perhaps minimize. And there's a lot more to this, obviously. I'm just giving a very brief summary of the things that I consider for clients and for myself to make sure that my body doesn't feel overwhelmed all the time. Then, and I mentioned it with the breathing, it's about grounding. Some of you have noticed websites or the mention of something like grounding and earthing. And I think it's so important, especially with our exposure to all these devices, to all the waves around us, other than obviously the solar flares and the geomagnetic storms. It's just constantly working with electronic devices, constantly working in an office or an environment where Wi-Fi is day and night. And now we start to also overthink because there's so much going on. Modern life is something quite challenging for many of us. You know, there's a lot to think about. So this grounding or earthing is about walking barefoot or lying on the grass, or I like to swim in the ocean. If I walk, I'd like to sometimes walk barefoot. And when I do that, I pay particular attention to my breathing, that I imagine I'm breathing from the center of the earth and pulling that breath all the way up through my body and out through my crown. And then letting that breath, well, almost like it's a visualization. I imagine that as that breath moves through, that it then discharges all this excess charge back into the earth. So that is just a simple tool that you can perhaps try. Maybe something like a Wim Hof breathing, which is 11 minutes for people who don't have time to do a long meditation, just to try and watch a simple breathing technique, perhaps on YouTube or somewhere else, just to feel like your nervous system is more regulated. So the self-care considerations to implement would be to make sure that you ground yourself, that you switch your Wi-Fi off at night, that you perhaps have a small protective chip or device on your phone and your other electronic devices to modify the radiation. There are so many other things. I like shungite. Shungite is a form of a natural stone that I like to carry around with me. I also filter my water over it. And it seems to be, or from what I've read and from what I've heard, really protective. Especially if I know I'm going to fly and I'm around a lot of radiation. I don't call it radioactive, but it almost sometimes, for my kind of constitution feels like it's like radioactivity. There's just a lot around me. So I like to use something like shungite. I also use black tourmaline on all my plug points. This was suggested to me by somebody years ago, and I suggest that to clients as well. It's just to try and modify some of our exposure. Then sleeping habits are really important. Sleeping not in a room where the TV is on, definitely not sleeping with the Wi-Fi on, making sure your phone is off its Wi-Fi and Bluetooth setting. And then the minerals in the water, I think, can really also help. So there's bits of information here that I hope you find helpful, maybe just something to consider, just maybe something else to add to your tools of how one can minimize the exposure to not just harmful frequencies around us, but just the reality of living on this earth and all the kinds of things around us that definitely impacts on us as energetic beings. So see what you can apply, see what you can implement. Please share your comments or your questions, and I hope you found this helpful. I will try to, in some of my future videos, expand a bit more about each of these. This is not my area of expertise, but it definitely is something that I consider as a health and wellness practitioner, something that can impact on the body. I hope you have a beautiful day, and we will be back soon with another conversation. Thank you for watching.